Welcome to the Alpha and Omega segment 10, the full uncut Divine Blueprint DNA.
So right now, hidden inside the cells of your body, there is a biological storage system that's so dense that a single teaspoon of it could hold more encoded data than the entirety of the internet.
Wait, literally the whole internet? In a teaspoon?
Yeah, 1 teaspoon.
That is insane.
Right, and there'd still be room left over to store every single word from every book ever written in human history. Just 1 teaspoon of DNA.
I mean, that kind of scale is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. And today, we're looking at a text that takes that mind-bending reality and asks a pretty dangerous question, honestly. It asks, did that microscopic code just write itself through billions of years of random chance? Or, is there a programmer?
Which is, well, it's the ultimate question of human origins, right?
Right.
And answering it means wading into this arena where ancient theology and modern molecular biology completely collide.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the absolute foundation of how we view reality.
Exactly. Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are immersing ourselves in a source document titled Apologia Creation 4.
It's a heavy one.
Oh, it is. This text mounts an incredibly detailed, vigorous defense of biblical creationism, while systematically attempting to dismantle evolutionary theory, basically block by block.
Yeah, it really goes after it.
It does. Now, before we go any further, I do need to make something incredibly clear to you, the listener. This material touches on some of the most fiercely debated, highly polarizing scientific and theological paradigms in existence.
To say the least.
Right. So our goal today is not to take a side or endorse these viewpoints. We are here to impartially unpack the arguments exactly as the author presents them. We just want you to understand the underlying logic and the core ideas driving this specific perspective.
Because, I mean, understanding the architect's blueprint is really the only way to genuinely evaluate the building.
Yeah.
And the blueprint laid out in this source material is vast.
Vast is a good word for it.
Yeah, it ranges from analyzing the original Hebrew syntax of ancient texts all the way to debating the statistical improbability of cellular assembly in a vacuum.
The sheer scale of it is fascinating. And to help us navigate this intense blend of ancient scripture and modern science, our resident expert is here to help connect the dots. So let's unpack this.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
We begin right where the source document begins, at the very foundation of matter according to the biblical narrative. The text zeroes in on the Genesis chapter 2 account, where it says, God formed man from the dust of the ground. And the author argues this is absolutely not a poetic metaphor.
Far from it, actually. The author treats that phrase as an ancient statement of chemical composition.
Really? Like literal chemistry?
Yeah, the argument is that humans share the exact same fundamental chemical makeup as the Earth's crust. So we're built from calcium, iron, carbon, oxygen, the literal basic elements of the ground. The physical hardware is earthbound.
Okay, but then the text draws a very sharp, deliberate line between plant life and animal life, which I found interesting. It points out that in the Genesis account, vegetation, trees, herbs, grass, they're created, but they're never actually referred to as living creatures.
Right.
That specific title is exclusively reserved for sea creatures, birds, and land animals.
And the author uses that distinction to establish a strict biblical definition of life. According to this framework, being a living creature requires way more than just biological cell division. It requires mobility and consciousness.
So a plant is biologically active, but it doesn't possess, a sentient awareness of its environment.
Exactly. The text gives a few examples of this conscious awareness, like a dog actively dodging a moving car on a street, or a whale at a marine park diving 20 feet to touch a ball, because it understands that that specific behavior results in a food reward.
They're reacting to external stimuli with a level of intention.
Yes, but I noticed the author is very careful to clarify that they are conscious but not self-conscious.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a really important distinction.
It is a vital boundary in the text's theology. Animals possess a reactionary awareness that's tied entirely to survival instincts. They aren't pondering their mortality or demonstrating moral agency.
Right, a dog isn't having an existential crisis.
Exactly. That higher-level self-awareness and moral capacity is reserved for humanity, which the source attributes to the concept of being made in the image of God.
Well, let's talk about another boundary the author emphasizes, because 10 different times in the first chapter of Genesis, the text repeats the phrase, after their kind. The plants, the fish, the beasts, they were all made after their kind.
Yeah, the source insists this establishes a hard biological limit on variation.
But wait, let me push back on this on behalf of the listener. Doesn't science observe animals changing and adapting literally all the time? I mean, we watch bacteria mutate in real time. We breed wild wolves into hundreds of different types of domestic dogs.
Oh, the author fully anticipates that pushback. And to address it, the text draws this massive, impenetrable wall between microevolution and macroevolution.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the author actually claims that when the scientific community says evolution, they are frequently pulling a rhetorical bait and switch on the public.
Bait and switch. How does the text define that mechanically?
It completely comes down to the genetic information being expressed.
Where?
So microevolution is just adaptation within the pre-existing boundaries of a specific kind.
Like Darwin's finches.
Perfectly. Think of Darwin's famous finches on the Galapagos Islands. A drought happens, seeds get harder to crack, and over a few generations, you see the finches develop thicker, stronger beaks. The author categorizes that as microevolution.
Because they're just using what they already have.
Right. The birds are simply utilizing genetic information that was already present in their DNA to adapt to the environment. They're basically just shuffling an existing deck of cards.
But they are still playing with bird cards. They haven't pulled a lizard card out of the deck.
Precisely the author's point. A finch remains a finch. Macroevolution, however, requires a mechanism where entirely new, previously non-existent genetic information is generated.
Which would allow an organism to transition into a completely different kind over millions of years.
Exactly. And the source emphatically states there is zero observable evidence for these macro transitions. No missing links demonstrating a mechanism that writes entirely new biological code. You could breed a wolf into a Great Dane or a Chihuahua, showcasing immense variety within the canine genetic limit.
But you will never breed a canine into a feline.
Never. What's fascinating here is how the source highlights a major linguistic shift in the original Hebrew text to underscore this ultimate separation of kinds, particularly when humanity arrives on the scene.
Oh, right. The language actually changes.
Yeah, for the entire creation week, the Hebrew word used is bara, which is an impersonal authoritative command. Let there be light. Let there be an expanse. It's divine fiat.
The universe is just being spoken into existence from a distance.
But then you hit verse 26, the creation of humanity, and the language suddenly pivots to asa, which translates to let us make. It becomes highly intimate and personal.
And the text links this directly to the New Testament.
Yeah. Yes, specifically John chapter 1, identifying Jesus Christ as the active agent of that creation. The author uses this linguistic pivot to argue that humanity wasn't the blind result of an evolutionary chain, but a distinct, deeply personal and separate engineering event.
Okay, if we accept that premise, it naturally sets up the next massive roadblock the author presents. Having established this deliberate, immediate creation framework, the text pivots to dissecting an idea called theistic evolution or progressive creationism.
Which is a very common belief nowadays.
It is. It's the belief held by many that God exists, but that he simply used the long, slow, bloody process of evolution over billions of years as his chosen method of creation.
And the author views that compromise as a fatal theological contradiction. The entire argument hinges on the timeline of death.
Let's explore that tension because the fundamental engine of evolutionary theory is survival of the fittest. It requires competition.
It requires violence.
Yeah, it requires the weak being killed off by predators or succumbing to disease and starvation, so that only the strong survive to pass on their mutated advantageous traits. Evolution is, by definition, a process driven by continuous death.
Yet, when you look at the Genesis record, the author points out that at the end of the creation week, God looks at everything and declares it very good.
And in this framework, very good means perfect.
Exactly. A very good creation means a perfect system. No genetic deformities, no cancerous mutations, and absolutely no survival of the fittest because there were no unfit animals.
The logical clash that the text presents here is honestly quite profound. According to the biblical narrative, death is an intruder. It didn't enter the world until man rebelled. The physical earth wasn't cursed with decay until the fall of Adam.
Which means if you try to insert billions of years of evolutionary processing before man even existed, you are inserting billions of years of bloodshed, bone cancer, and violent death into a world God called perfect. Yeah, the author asks a pretty devastating theological question. If the earth was fundamentally built on a foundation of death and suffering for millennia before humanity arrived, then what exactly did Adam's sin do?
I mean, it effectively neuters the entire biblical narrative arc. The source argues that trying to blend evolution with Genesis turns the text upside down.
It does.
If death was just the normal operating procedure of the universe long before humans existed, then the curse of death mentioned in Genesis becomes completely meaningless. You cannot reconcile the inherently violent mechanism of evolution with a sinless pre-fall world.
It creates a philosophical paradox that the author believes is just unsolvable. But, the text doesn't just rely on theological philosophy. It makes a hard pivot straight into modern molecular biology.
Right, here is where it gets really interesting. Because the source brings up Charles Darwin himself and highlights this massive, unavoidable blind spot. When Darwin published On the Origin of Species back in 1859, he knew absolutely nothing about the existence of DNA.
Genetics, as a scientific field, just didn't exist. Darwin's theories were based entirely on observing macro-level physical traits, like the shape of a beak, the color of a moth, the structure of a fossilized bone.
He had no electron microscopes.
None. He had absolutely no concept of the microscopic digital universe operating inside the nucleus of a single cell.
And the author brings in a scientist, Dr. A.E. Wilder-Smith, to explore this gap, arguing that DNA is not just biological sludge. DNA is literal operational software. It is encoded information.
Highly complex information.
The source states that a single microscopic cell contains 1,000 million bits of genetic data. It functions like an automated high-tech factory, complete with central memory banks and active quality control mechanisms.
And Wilder-Smith's thesis is that modern genetics is fundamentally about information storage, retrieval, and execution. Every living organism is running on a completely unique, highly complex line of code that dictates its physical nature, its metabolic growth, and its eventual death.
The source text actually uses an analogy about seeing a message spelled out in alphabet cereal to explain this, but honestly, I think a modern software development analogy makes the author's point even clearer.
Oh, definitely.
You can't just throw millions of random ones and zeros into a computer processor, hit blend, and expect it to spontaneously generate a functioning operating system.
Right. For code to execute, you need syntax. You need a specific language structure. You need a compiler. DNA operates as a flawless biological operating system.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is introducing a concept from information theory. The core tenet here is that complex, specified operational code cannot originate from a random, chaotic event.
You cannot get self-executing software from an unguided explosion of matter. Code necessitates a coder. Information requires an intelligence to arrange it.
But wait, if DNA is this highly specified, flawless software program, what happens when the code changes? Because that is the central pillar of evolutionary theory, right? That genetic mutations happen over time, and those random coding errors occasionally produce an upgrade, driving the species forward.
Well, the author aggressively attacks the mechanism of mutation. The text cites a director from the German Federal Institute of Physics and Technology, Dr. Werner Gitt, who argues that, mechanistically, mutations are always a destructive force.
Always.
Always. They are coding errors. A mutation always results in a loss or corruption of existing genetic information. It never writes a new blueprint.
Let's unpack the mechanism of that, because people constantly point to things like MRSA, superbugs that become resistant to antibiotics, as proof of evolution happening right in front of us.
Sure, and the author categorizes that as microevolution, but it's crucial to understand how the bacteria actually survives. Often, an antibiotic works by attaching itself to a specific chemical receptor on the bacteria's cell wall, kind of like a key fitting into a lock.
Okay, making sense.
A mutation might damage or completely remove that receptor. The lock is broken, so the antibiotic key can no longer attach, and the bacteria survives.
Oh, wow. So it survived because the mutation destroyed information, not because it invented a new defense system.
Correct. The bacteria lost genetic data. It is functionally degraded, even though that degradation provided a temporary survival advantage in that specific environment.
It's not spontaneously generating the vast amounts of new, specialized code required to evolve from a single-celled organism into a multicellular animal.
Not at all. And to illustrate just how complex the existing code really is, the text brings up a concept that sounds like advanced robotics, the von Neumann machine.
Oh, I love this concept. Named after the brilliant mathematician John von Neumann. Decades ago, he theorized about the ultimate machine, a device capable of being entirely self-producing, self-sustaining, and self-repairing.
It's the holy grail of engineering.
Exactly. Think about trying to build a Mars rover that can mine its own iron from the Martian soil, smelt it, manufacture replacement gears for its own engine, and then build a complete replica of itself, all while keeping its internal temperature perfectly stable without human intervention.
Human engineers can't even come close to building something like that. The complexity would just cause it to overheat or constantly break down.
Yet, as the author observes, every single biological organism on Earth operates as a fully functional von Neumann machine.
We regulate a steady 98.6-degree core temperature. We metabolize energy to self-sustain. We reproduce. And most astonishingly, we self-repair at a microscopic level.
And the source mentions the specific mechanism for this repair. The text highlights DNA polymerase, which are highly specialized enzymes that essentially act as molecular proofreaders.
They literally travel up and down the strands of DNA, unzipping the code, checking for structural damage or chemical errors, cutting out the bad sections, and synthesizing replacements.
It is programmed self-preservation. It's unbelievable.
And the author makes a really sharp point regarding human interference with his code. People often point to things like the cloning of Dolly the sheep as a triumph of human mastery over biology, suggesting that if we can manipulate life, life must be purely mechanistic.
But the source argues the exact opposite. Cloning a sheep requires teams of highly educated scientists working in pristine laboratories, utilizing highly sophisticated equipment to intentionally manipulate genetic material.
It proves that interacting with this level of coding requires an outside intelligence. The sheep didn't clone itself by random chance in a muddy puddle.
Which naturally leads to the mathematical core of the author's argument. If von Neumann machines are practically impossible for our brightest human engineers to build, what are the actual mathematical odds of blind, unguided nature building one?
The numbers the author cites here are staggering. A molecular biologist calculated the probability of a random mutation creating just one functional protein sequence.
And to understand this, you have to realize a protein isn't just a blob. It's a chain of hundreds of amino acids that have to be in the exact right sequence, like a 150 dial combination lock.
And then it has to fold perfectly into a highly specific 3D shape just to function. The odds of achieving that by chance were put at 1 in 10 to the 74th power.
To give you a sense of scale, that is essentially the equivalent of blindfolding a person and asking them to find one specific marked atom hidden somewhere in the entire Milky Way galaxy on their very first try.
But it goes even further. Other scientists calculated the probability of all the necessary proteins combining to form a single functioning cell by chance. They estimated it would take one chance in 10 to the 40,000th power years.
There aren't enough billions of years in the accepted evolutionary timeline to even begin to approach a number that large.
No, not even close. And the final nail in the mathematical coffin comes from a physicist who proposed a thought experiment. Take the simplest living cell. Break every single chemical bond so it's just a soup of basic ingredients.
Okay, a biological soup.
Right. Assuming perfectly pristine laboratory conditions where absolutely nothing interferes, what are the odds of those chemicals naturally reassembling themselves back into a living cell?
The calculation is 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power. I can't even conceptualize a number with 100 billion zeros.
You don't. It effectively approaches mathematical infinity. The author's point is that looking at the intricate mechanics of protein folding and the sheer statistical impossibility of spontaneous cellular assembly, believing in a random, chance-based origin for life requires vastly more blind faith than believing in an intelligent creator.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from the ancient Hebrew meaning of dust to the mathematical impossibility of protein assembly. How does the author synthesize all of this?
Well, the text synthesizes the biblical narrative, the information theory of DNA, and the mathematical impossibilities into two drastically opposed worldviews.
Yeah.
The author asserts that rejecting a creator isn't just adopting a different scientific model. It forces you to embrace a universe governed purely by faithless time, chance, and matter. It leads to a paradigm where humanity is a cosmic accident, where objective moral standards don't exist, leading only to what the author describes as a philosophy of tragedy and despair.
On the flip side, accepting that this mind-bending biological complexity, this self-repairing von Neumann machine we inhabit, was intentionally designed by a personal creator changes the entire human equation. It means you are not an accident. It means the intricate code inside your cells was authored with profound purpose.
But this raises an important question. What do we do with the massive biological anomalies that evolutionary models still struggle to account for? The author leaves a few fascinating breadcrumbs throughout the text pointing to these larger mysteries.
Yeah, there is one deeply provocative thought the source brings up almost in passing, but the mechanism behind it is baffling. We didn't even get to dive into it today. the origin of sexes, the XX and XY chromosome systems.
It is a massive mechanical hurdle.
Think about it. If macroevolution dictates that life advances through successive, slight, random genetic modifications over millions of years, how exactly did two entirely distinct, wildly complex, but 100% perfectly compatible reproductive systems somehow mutate and evolve entirely independently, but simultaneously?
It's a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. If the male reproductive system evolved a million years before the female system was fully functional, the species goes extinct in one generation. They had to arrive fully operational and perfectly complementary at the exact same moment in time. The author argues that blind, unguided evolution simply cannot account for that level of coordinated engineering.
It's an incredible biological paradox to consider.
It really is. It's something to chew on the next time you hear a debate about the origins of life, or, the next time you realize that right now, without you even having to think about it, microscopic enzymes are zipping up and down your DNA, repairing billions of lines of code. Whether you view that code as the product of unguided biological refinement over eons, or as the literal handwriting of a purposeful programmer, you have to admit, the mechanics of life are absolutely breathtaking.
They really are.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today on this deep dive into Apologia Creation 4. Keep questioning, keep exploring the mechanisms behind the mysteries, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for joining our full uncut of segment 10. Please visit our digital archives for all classes.